How did you get started in TV?
I started in television in Trinidad in the West Indies. Television had come into the island in the 60s. I was a radio journalist. I thought I was rather good, especially since I got a plum assignment to London in the early 60s to cover the Trinidad and Tobago Independence Conference at Marlborough House. And when I got back to Trinidad thinking I had covered myself in great glory, because no other radio journalist had been sent. And so I had the field to myself, hence the glory. Nobody else competed. Television came in and I naturally wanted to gravitate to the television world. And I applied and wasn't immediately successful. And then wasn't quite sure I wanted to do television. I was enjoying radio so much. So I agreed to do the news on television at 7 o'clock at night. And later on to do a discussion program called Dialogue, which attempted to inject an element of controversy into rather placid West Indian political life. And then I came to London to work at the BBC at Bush House and boasted to my colleagues there that I'd been involved in television in a peripheral way in Trinidad. And they said to me, if you think you're so good, why don't you apply to this new place called ITN? And I went to ITN and was given an audition and I was employed. I was probably the most surprised person in the world. I never thought I had a chance. I did it because I thought my career at Bush House was not going as fast as I thought it could. And in any case, there was a sort of a perception that Bush House was a kind of end game. You didn't move on too far from there, and I wanted to get out. So I applied to ITN, and that's how it happened.
And what were your first impressions of the TV industry?
I was astonished at the TV industry when I joined ITN. It was all a big, big surprise to me. I knew so little about television in a large country like Britain. I started doing the news on television in Trinidad. Trinidad had a population then of about 1 million and a bit. Broadcasting to the United Kingdom was an entirely different proposition. And of course, I began by getting involved in the Northern Ireland story at the time of the Troubles, you know, that wonderful euphemism for the mayhem that went on in Northern Ireland in the late 60s and 70s and 80s. And of course, that immediately gets you noticed quite nationally. So my first impression was about just how important an element in British life television was. People watched the news. They set their time by watching the news, and they actually digested what you said and listened very carefully to what you said. So I was surprised by how very, very quickly you were recognized as somebody who was on television. And of course, I was a black face. There weren't any other black faces on television. So I was noticed. And those were the bits that surprised me.
Tell us about you and News at 10.
Well, working for News at 10 was the highlight of any young journalist's television life. News at 10 had established an enviable reputation. I think, first of all, because nobody thought that you could schedule a news at 10 o'clock at night. In those days, 10 o'clock was regarded as very late in the evening for television. And I think ITN was rather given News at 10, or the time at 10 o'clock, as something which the companies had to do to satisfy the broadcasting regulations. ITV got the sort of contract by saying that you had at some stage of the day, or at several stages in the day, to have national news broadcasts to compete with the BBC. ITN were given 10 o'clock because they thought it was a dead time. And they soon made it into the most watched time on British television, or certainly one of the most. I think that had to do with its style. They had these bongs, you know, Big Ben. I think it had a lot to do with the strength of the editorial content. It was very well driven. I think it had a great deal to do too with the personalities. They had this idea of two newscasters, and these people became household names. Reggie Bosanquet, Andrew Gardner, Anna Ford, Alistair Burnett, Robin Day did interviews. I mean, all the biggest names in British television appeared on News at 10. I was absolutely delighted beyond words to have a walk-on part in what had become, even by the time I joined, a great, great British institution. It was absolutely wonderful.
But you became the brand, didn't you? You became, in later years, the embodiment of News at 10.
Well, I don't think I was ever the embodiment. I mean, I think the reputation of News at 10 really preceded me. I got, again, much to my surprise, the job of being the sole anchor for News at 10. In other words, there were always two newscasters. I got the job of being the sole anchor, and that was a great surprise to me. When it was being decided, I was thinking, you know, what am I going to do if I don't get this job? Because if you have two newscasters, then you have several combinations. If you have a single anchor, then you have a single anchor.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that job, then you are in a spot of bother, really. So I mean, I contemplated what I would do if I didn't get it. But I was lucky. I mean, I got the job. And I thought it was probably the most important journalistic thing that has happened to me. Because to be able... Well, let me start again. I've always thought the whole business of the dissemination of news to be an essential part of what we like to call, and we proudly call, our democratic process. We tell the people in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, you must be like us. You must be a democracy. There must be freedom of information. You must let people know what was going on. To have a role in the dissemination of that information, I always thought was a crucial part, beyond television, beyond social life, essential element of the way we live, of the way we are governed, of the traditions that this country is so proud of. So I thought to have a part in telling people what went on and trying to make it interesting, accessible, so that people can really, you know, why are people watching something about Syria or Uganda or, you know, India? You have to be able to catch their imagination to make that interesting. So I always took the job terribly seriously because I thought it was very important. And News at 10 managed to do that.
What were the landmark moments for you as the anchor of News at 10?
Oh gosh, I mean, there are so many. I suppose the death of Diana is one that comes to mind. I don't think most world events have a kind of genesis. You can, you know, there's a sort of bit where you can see the problem beginning to emerge. You can perhaps forecast, sometimes badly, what the course of events is going to be and what the end game might be. If you're lucky, you get that right. The death of Diana just came out of the blue in Paris with Dodi Al-Fayed. These two people who were apparently having a serious relationship and so on. And quite out of the blue. The other thing, of course, was that she was extraordinarily well liked by the public. She was, as Tony Blair or Alistair Campbell liked to think, they coined the phrase, the people's princess. She did capture people's imagination. And to think that at that young age her life had suddenly been cut off was the most tremendous shock for people. I got a call about 3 or 4 in the morning or something, and I went into London, and I never left for a week. I stayed there, doing a variety of programs about her, and the shock of it all was beyond words. And I remember that as one of the things.